So get this. A single bill making its way through the US Congress could pretty much create a political earthquake for one of India's most important industries. Today, we are going to break down this piece of legislation. It represents a huge shift in the US-India tech relationship, and we'll get into what it really means for the future of outsourcing. All right, let's jump right in.
Okay, to really get why this is such a massive deal, you just have to look at this one number, $250 billion. That's what India's IT sector is worth. It's a global powerhouse, right? And it's built on a foundation that this new American bill is literally designed to crack. So yeah, the stakes, they couldn't be higher.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at the legislative threat itself. Then, we'll dive into the politics driving it. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the HIRE Act, explore the potential ripple effects of the tax, and finally ask what happens next.
Okay, Section 1. For decades, the US-India tech corridor, it's always been seen as this great, mutually beneficial partnership. But now, that long-standing relationship is facing a really serious political challenge, and it's taking a very, very concrete form.
And here it is. It's called the HIRE Act. That stands for Halting International Relocation of Employment. I mean, the name pretty much tells you everything you need to know, right? It's aimed squarely at disrupting the very business model that fuels India's IT giants and its booming global capability centers, the GCCs. Those are basically the in-house tech and operations hubs that huge global companies set up in India.
So the really crucial thing to grasp here is the shift. We are literally watching things move from an era of collaboration to something totally different, an era where a protectionist agenda is producing what's been called a legislative threat with teeth. This isn't just talk anymore. This is a formal, on-the-table policy proposal.
All right, so what's the deal with the politics behind all this? I mean, how did an idea that could totally upend a $250 billion industry go from the political fringes straight into the halls of Congress? It's a pretty wild journey.
Well, believe it or not, this whole idea of taxing foreign workers, it actually started with fringe commentators like Jacques Posobiec. But then it got a huge boost of legitimacy when it was picked up and endorsed by people like Peter Navarro, Trump's former trade advisor. And that's what pulled it right into the mainstream Republican conversation.
And from there, that once fringe idea got polished up and translated into the really blunt, really powerful language you see in a formal bill. The sponsor, Republican Senator Bernie Moreno, he frames it as a direct fight against, and I'm quoting here, globalist politicians and C-suite executives.
Okay, so now that we've got a handle on the political energy behind it, let's get into the details. What would the HIRE Act actually do if it passed and became law?
Someone called this bill a policy weapon with sharp teeth. And honestly, that's not an exaggeration at all. Its entire design is aggressive. The whole point is to make it financially painful for American companies to send work overseas.
So here's how it would work. The attack is basically two-pronged. First, it slaps a massive 25% tax on all outsourcing payments. And second, it would completely get rid of the ability for American companies to deduct those payments as business expenses. It's a really powerful one-two punch.
So who exactly gets hit by this? Well, the definition of outsourcing payments is incredibly broad. We're not just talking about the big IT firms here. It's any payment made by a U.S. company to a foreign entity for work that benefits U.S. consumers. That means the giant tech service companies, those global capability centers, and yep, even individual Indian freelancers working for American clients.
And they've tried to think of everything. The bill even includes what they call anti-abuse clauses to stop companies from getting clever and just rerouting payments through different countries to avoid the tax. Plus, it specifies exactly where the money goes. All that revenue would go directly into funding apprenticeship and workforce programs, right there in the U.S.
So, let's say this policy weapon were ever actually fired. What would the fallout even look like? Will the potential consequences create a series of really difficult, maybe even impossible choices for businesses on both sides of the Pacific?
To really understand the risk here, just look at this number. We're talking about 50 to 60%. That's the share of revenue for India's major IT players that comes from clients in the United States. When you're that dependent on one market, any major disruption isn't just a small problem, it's a full-blown existential threat.
And this is where you get to a classic no-win scenario. What do? Either the Indian IT firms have to absorb that massive 25% tax, which would absolutely crush their profit margins, or they pass that cost on to their American clients. And if you're one of those US companies, that means your operational costs would suddenly just skyrocket. There's really no easy way out of this.
And here's something really important to remember. This isn't just a problem for India.
If U.S. companies are forced to pay way more for essential services, where do you think that cost is going to go? It gets passed on. This could lead to some real inflationary pressure, with everyday consumers seeing higher prices in key areas like banking, customer support, and even aviation, all sectors that rely heavily on these offshore operations.
Okay, so with such dramatic potential consequences on the line, we get to the big question. Is this actually going to happen? Let's take a look at the bill's real chances of becoming law, and, maybe just as importantly, what it signals for the future, no matter what happens.
Well, the good news, at least for the IT industry, is that right now most experts believe this bill faces a very steep climb. So even though it represents a serious threat and there's a lot of political noise, its actual path to becoming law is, shall we say, very, very difficult.
And here's the core challenge it faces. While the bill definitely has a solid amount of support within the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, the broader political headwinds blowing against it are pretty significant.
So here's a breakdown of why it's so tough. For one, as of right now, it doesn't have any support from the White House. 2, the Republican majority in Congress is razor thin, which makes passing controversial bills really hard. It's also possible this is just a negotiating tactic, right? A bargaining chip for bigger trade talks down the road. And finally, let's be real. Similar MAGA-supported efforts, they've failed in the past.
But look, this is the crucial bottom line here. Even if the HIRE Act never, ever becomes law, the simple fact that it's being seriously debated is, in itself, a huge policy signal. It shows that the protectionist agenda is in full swing and that the geopolitical climate for the entire outsourcing industry is fundamentally changing.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. You hear all the political rhetoric about bringing jobs back home, right? But behind all that talk, does the U.S. even have the domestic pipeline of skilled tech talent needed to actually do all that work? It's a question that cuts to the very core of why companies started outsourcing in the first place. And, well, it's one that has no easy answer.